society. And you can look around and see some pretty amazing women doing valuable things after menopause. I used to say I didn't think the playing field would ever be leveled until men could give birth. Now, and that may happen at some point, right? I know that there are medical studies where they're looking at the possibility of uterine implants for trans women. So these are things that may actually one day be possible. But until then, the playing field isn't level. We are always cast because of our reproductive organs and our reproductive processes. We're always put in a difficult position, right? Getting your period is this rite of passage. Congratulations, you're a woman. It's also the beginning of sexuality, right? It's also the beginning of what comes from sexuality, which for women is objectification. What if we thought about menopause not as just this natural transition where your biologically fertile years end, but it becomes about a reclamation of self, a reclamation of self-actualization instead of objectification, that it can still be this amazing period of growth and evolution if we looked at it a little bit differently. And again, this is about minute perspective shifts. This is not huge otherworld thinking. This is just slight perspective shifts. And this idea that we don't have anything to offer after a certain age is ludicrous. The other thing that I was going to say to you, there's this great quote, right? Out of all of the basquillions of atom combinations in the world, no one is made up of the same sequence of billions of atoms that you are, that you, and you, anybody listening to this, we are all made up of billions of unique atoms that are not replicable unless we were cloned, which, is a different conversation. That is an amazing thing to celebrate. How can you actually even bother to compare yourself to somebody because there's nobody else in the world like you? So go out and dance, do something fun, celebrate that, right? These are all things that we forget as we age, and we forget to remind ourselves of our unique capabilities and our unique perspectives and our unique understanding of the world and how we can share that with other people. As I said, all of these things about you being unique don't need to make you isolated. In fact, all of our uniqueness built into community is what makes the world so wonderful.
Yeah. And I've heard you talk about how when you were in your 30s or 20s, you weren't thinking about what your 50s or 40s or 60s or beyond would be like, much less menopause. And I deeply related to that, honestly, until preparing for this conversation. Or, a really close friend of mine, my friend Sasha, she's in her 50s, and she was talking about menopause on a podcast episode a couple months ago. And it was the first time I'd ever even thought about it. And my therapist asked me to consider like what I wanted my day to look like when I was 50. I couldn't even see that far. I thought was really interesting. And so can you talk a little bit about that? And then about how you were at this precipice, I think at the beginning of lockdown, where you talk about going into starting this career pivot and feeling a bit lost in between projects. And I'm really interested in that time, like moments of flex and being in the in-between.
The first thing for me, I think that was the hardest, was that when I left What Not to Wear, I remember thinking, oh God, I'm leaving a job. I didn't think that I was leaving the job. I didn't think that I was leaving a job that would follow me around and that I would be associated with even 10 years after this show has ended. And in a lot of ways, that kind of put me in a box that I couldn't get out of. And as grateful as I am to that show and all of the opportunities that it brought me, I was tired of making people over, and I was tired of dressing people, and I wanted something more. I wanted to do something bigger. I wanted to do another show. I was the executive producer of a talk show that got sold but never made. And then I went back to TLC to do a show called Love, Lust, or Run, because that was about public perception versus personal transmission and trying to make those two things complement each other. and to help people figure out what they wanted to say and do it in a way that was much more digestible and understandable to people. So that was a very important show to me. And I got to executive produce that one. And I really loved it because I had so much more creative control in a way. But after that, which was, that ended in 2016, I thought, well, I'm going to take 2016 off. I'm going to take a year. I'm going to do some traveling and I'm going to decide what I want to do next. And I really started to feel a little aimless and a little purposeless. And I couldn't figure out exactly what I wanted to do or where I wanted to be or where I wanted to go. And by the end of 2016, I wound up on an operating table when I had spine surgery. And it was pretty extensive spine surgery. It was about a 7.5-hour surgery. My lower spine is made of titanium plates and screws, rods. And it was right after that I really had like my first kind of confrontation with like a real mental health crisis. And I started to get very anxious. I was crying all the time. I kept saying, like, the minute 6 weeks after my operation, I saw that all that foreign material in my body on an x-ray, I kept saying, I feel like something is eating me alive from the inside out. I have all this foreign material in my body and it scared me. And I was having very, very extreme emotional responses. And it turns out that, yes, when you have a surgery like heart, brain, or spine, things that are life-threatening, sometimes your body thinks that it is dying. That can trigger a very extreme emotional response. And that's what I assumed was happening, that I felt kind of paranoid and agoraphobic and very anxious. And that went on for a long time while I finally started to get into physical therapy and I was able to start, working out in a way to strengthen my back and my body, which made me feel a lot more in control. And as I spent 18 months doing that, as I started to come out of that physical therapy, my father was very sick and he had been diagnosed years before and they said, you'll be fine until you're not. And all of a sudden he was not. And so he got very sick in March of 2018 and passed away in November of 2018. And as much as I knew that it was coming, and as much as I thought that I was dealing with my fear and the grief and the impending doom of losing him through these kind of physical symptoms that I thought I was sort of mimicking my dad. He had heart disease and I got heart palpitations and he had joint pain and muscle fatigue and I had joint pain and muscle fatigue and he would get a rash and I would get a rash and he would throw up from, not really having organs that were working. It was very hard for him to eat. And all of a sudden I would start throwing up from foods that I used to eat all the time. Food allergies came out of nowhere. Looking back, those two seminal events were the things that I thought my physicality was reacting to. It was actually perimenopause that was probably amplified by the stress and the grief and the trauma, both physical and emotional, of surgery and losing my father. But I really felt so completely out of control, so completely confused, so in such a deep need state and not really even understanding what I needed, that honestly, this company was something that became a mission and a purpose because I felt so alone and so isolated. And I didn't want anybody else to have to feel that way. If I was having difficulty finding really reliable information and good product information about like what was out there, I have a health profile, so I couldn't take hormones. What was non-hormonal that I could take that would be helpful to me? If I, with all of my access to medical doctors and being very privileged to have a lot of health aid at my fingertips, and being able to afford insurance and all of these things, if I couldn't figure it out, imagine the person who doesn't have those advantages. What are they doing? How are they coping? And the same thing that I had been thinking about while I felt unmoored and floating around and sort of not knowing what I wanted to do with my career and realizing that I wasn't getting phone calls to be on TV shows anymore and wondering if maybe that was just it for me. I really had to think, well, what is my kernel of truth? What is the thing? Forget about the fact that I've been in fashion. Forget about the fact that I've been in style. What's underneath that? What is my actual skill set? What am I interested? What is my purpose? What is meaning for me? And making people feel when they are in a crisis of confidence that they are going to be okay is what I have always done, right? And hormonal chaos is a crisis of confidence. And what I experienced in menopause was a crisis of confidence. And I needed somebody to tell me that it was going to be okay and that there were options. And that if I didn't look like myself or didn't feel like myself, then I could have agency over how I wanted to manage that. And nobody at that time that I knew of was doing that. And when my friends at ARFA came to me and said, we're starting this brand, we're going to be a brand company and we're going to start a bunch of different brands. Will you be a beta tester for State of Menopause? I lost my mind because it was the opportunity for me to really sink my teeth into something and care about the products that were being made for a stage of life that I barely understood. And when they decided they didn't want to be a product company anymore, that they didn't want to build brands, that they wanted to go into technology instead, they were going to sunset the brand. And I thought, oh, whoa, hold up. I just got to this party. I just arrived here. I just found this new sense of purpose in really being able to talk about menopause, in really being able to talk about the difficulty of like midlife adjacencies, right? 45 to 55, highest rate of decreased earning potential for women, divorce, depression. And I don't think that is by accident. I think there is a lot going on in midlife, menopause being one of those things. And how are we making the quality of our lives better at this time in the middle? So I decided to buy the majority share in the company and keep it going. And I thought it does not have to be all of the things that it is right now. In fact, it has to be more. We have to create more content, more education. So really, what started for me as I don't know what's happening to me, as my own midlife crisis, I took the bull by the horn, so to speak, and decided I'm not going to let anybody choose what happens to me. I'm going to choose what happens to me. I'm not going to wait for another television show to cast me. I'm terrible with social media. I don't know what my personal brand is. I am going to sink my teeth into something that feels bigger than me, feels bigger than my community, feels bigger than anything that I have done before. I want to take something on that is going to affect 52% of the world's population and impact 100% of the world's population. So why not do something in service of other people that is truly still about raising your sense of self-esteem, giving you a sense of agency, giving you choices and making those choices become educated? So I guess my needs were the mother of invention, right? Necessity was a mother of invention, but it was personal to me. I wanted my personal crisis to mean something, to stand for something. And that was really how I got to this place. It was that I didn't want people to choose for me, right? I wanted to be proactive in what my life was turning into. And not just somebody who was once on a show that people still love and remember. I wanted my life to be moving. I wanted it to be dynamic again. And the only way to do that was really to make a choice and move forward. And look, I don't know if this is the end all. I don't know if this is the final company or if I'm going to continue to build companies or if I'll do another TV show again. Who knows? But I knew that I didn't want to stand still anymore. And I felt like while I'd been standing still, enough had happened to me to inform where I wanted to take my life next.
I'm so happy that this all happened for you as it did. And it's such a great story of that Steve Jobs quote of you can't connect the dots moving forward, only looking back. And it all elaborately, beautifully makes so much sense. And it shows how you don't stay stagnant and are always growing. And one of the reasons for that is and I've heard you speak about this before, your perspective on friendship and mentorship and how it's important to have friends of all different ages and have intergenerational friendships. If you can talk about that a bit and how that relates to menopause and how your relationships with people and different generations have informed you and you've helped them and they've helped you.
I would say that for the most part, I have spent my life, started off with all of my friends sort of being my age, and they got younger and younger and younger because I didn't get married and I didn't have kids, and my schedule became very different than other people's. And when I was working in television, my hours were insane. I could work up to 18 hours a day. So very different kind of life than a lot of friends my age had. And I wound up hanging out with people who were a lot younger than me, and who got younger and younger and younger than me, to the point where I felt like I almost had to course correct, like that being around so many young people was distorting my view of myself and my understanding of my age in a way that was sort of making me feel sad. When you have people pretty much exclusively who are in their early 30s as your friends when you're in your late 40s or early 50s, and sometimes that can be painful, because you can look at them and say, oh my God, your whole life is in front of you and mine isn't anymore. And I had to course correct and like reconnect with people who were my age so that I had more perspective and I could be more generous towards my younger friends instead of envying them, right? I mean, that's not the kind of relationship, that's not what anybody wants in a friendship. Don't feel like I have very many friends who are much older than me. And that I miss, because I really do believe that I learned so much from having younger friends. It really affected my ability to speak openly and honestly. I think that I've gotten permission from younger generations because I see how incredibly open younger generations are about who they are and coming to terms with their identity. And I really appreciate that. I've always wanted to do that. I've always tried to talk about tricky, maybe sort of uncomfortable things with people. And so I felt like this was like a very natural thing to do. But at the same time, I also recognized, oh, wow, here's also the potential not just to educate people my age, but to make sure that all of my younger friends are not in this crisis when they get here, that they will have all of this information, that they will make choices based on already knowing what menopause is and what to do about it, right? We can start that conversation now so that really we won't have to have these interviews over and over and over again for people to really understand that, what menopause is and what they can, maybe understand could be coming in terms of what to expect and what, there are some symptoms you may feel, some symptoms you may not get, but you should know what is possible in this realm and under this umbrella. And because there hasn't been enough research done, we can only say with some certainty, like, okay, this is around the age that it happens, and here are some of the symptoms, and here are some potential solutions and to mitigate these issues, right? And all of that is going to change. There are going to be advancements in pharma and science that are going to make menopause even easier over time. A lot of baby boomers didn't talk to us about what was happening. Generations before that did not talk about it. I think that Gen X will be the last generation that will experience that kind of shame and fear, and the first generation to really turn on this conversation, so that by the time you're in menopause, you will be like, oh my God, I've heard about this for years. I know exactly what to do. That doctors will be more informative, that care practitioners will be more informative, that you'll have companies like mine that are out to educate and provide you with answers for, whether you want non-hormonal product or you want recommendations for what kind of hormones are on the market. These are the things that we need to be doing. This is how we help each other. This is a stage of life that, unfortunately, anybody with female reproductive organs has had to white knuckle through. And if you can't afford hormones or you don't have insurance, you should not feel like this is a hopeless situation. And not everybody has extreme circumstances. Not everybody has extreme issues in menopause, of course. But we need to think about all of the people who are going to experience this and really start iterating for the ones with the most need. Because when you go down this rabbit hole, you see this is not just about ageism. It is about sexism. It's not just about sexism. It's about racism. It's not just about racism. It's about ableism. And if we are solving for these issues, for the most marginalized in this incredibly stigmatized conversation, then we are actually doing the work for everybody. Then we are really making it a much better conversation and an easier one for everybody to have and manage.
You've said this before too, but aging is an inevitable process. And yet the language
right?
Right. The way you have talked about that really shifted that. I completely took that for granted. I didn't even clock that as being problematic until I heard, it was just kind of in the dialogue.
To me, it's always been in the dialogue, and it has always been the weirdest thing to say, right? I mean, how can you be against something that is inevitable, that you can use Botox and fillers and get a facelift or a neck lift or lipo or go to, I don't know, your favorite resort or whatever it is, you are still going to die at the end of the day. That is the truth, right? And until then, every day above ground is a good one. And if we pay attention to our health, if we pay attention to our self-care, we're going to have freedom longer. That's what I don't love going to the gym. I'm like the least healthy wellness person that there is probably, but I did start going back to a trainer, and I started going back 3 times a week. I got my bone density test back. My bones are very weak. I am really at risk for osteoporosis. And I was like, I have got to start strength training consistently. If I had been strength training since my 30s, my bones would be rock solid. And so it is really important that we think about preventative measures and that, just what your therapist said. What do you think like a day in your life would look like at 50? The fact is, you may not know, but you should at least consider all of the things that are the transitions that you're going to hit at different milestones in your life so that you can prepare for them in a way that leaves you with the best quality of life possible. My trainer said to me, you need to be working out so that you're not a fall risk, so that as you age, you continue to have independence and freedom. And that really resonated with me. I thought, oh my God, I don't want to be so dependent on people because I didn't take care of myself. At a certain point, of course, yes, we age, we need help, of course. But I want to be as strong and independent as I can possibly be for as long as I can possibly be. And understanding menopause and what happens to us in menopause is actually part of that independence and that freedom.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was going to ask you this, and you mentioned weight training, and you mentioned you had done that in your 30s, but most of the people who listen to this podcast are in their 20s or 30s. And of course, there are people in their 40s and 50s and 60s and older too, but that's the majority. And so is there anything in addition to weight training that we should be thinking about in preparing for menopause and just the future in general?
I think that the reason that I'm very hesitant about saying like take supplements, I mean, calcium and vitamin D, I think after 50 is incredibly important, but really it is the reason I'm so hesitant about saying buy this supplement or buy that supplement.
Sure.
Is truly because we are at a real kind of amazing moment in history, right? Where you're seeing a lot of people come out with supplements for different things, whether it's supplements for menopause or supplements for aging or supplements for whatever it is, right? But the fact is, science is catching up real fast. And eventually you're going to be able to customize. You will be able to take a blood test and customized supplements for your body's needs, whether you need more vitamin K than somebody else, or you need more vitamin A, or whatever it is going to be available to you.
That's cool.
So oh my God, absolutely. I mean, think of all the tracker kinds of tech, right? That is like you can wear an Oura ring and that tells you about your sleep hygiene and your heart rate and all of these things that we are able to have some agency over by really understanding what's happening to us. That's only going to get bigger and broader. You're only going to find more at-home testing to give you customized in nutritional, like health benefits and customized supplement benefits. So those are all things to pay attention to. Pay attention to what is sort of the latest in terms of health and nutrition, always. Nutrition, sleep, and exercise are always going to be the tent poles of longevity. There is no question. And then I do believe educate yourself about everything. Educate yourself about everything to do with your hormonal lifespan. Right? So everything you learned about your period, everything that you can learn about not just getting pregnant, but what pregnancy is actually like. What happens to your body during pregnancy? What are the risks? What are the benefits? What happens in pregnancy? Because that is also hormonal chaos. What What do you need to know about infertility? What do you need to know about postpartum depression? What do you need to know? Did you know that you would be bleeding for a month after you had a child? And that may not even be due to tearing. Do you know what it's like to have vaginal tearing? Like, these are all things that people say to me, I had a baby and nobody told me this, ... Nobody told me ... Don't wait for somebody to tell you. Go looking for the most robust kind of information that you can find. And certainly when it comes to menopause, obviously you don't have to start doing that at 25, but by the time you're 35, start knowing what is going to happen after your family. And you may not want kids, or look, you may wind up being, wanting kids and not being able to have them. For all of the things, all of the possibilities, know what is available and what's possible. Know that you may be fertile, and if you're infertile, what you should do about it, right? Or know about IVF, know about IUIs, know about all of the things that are possible in terms of reproductive health. And that includes the end of reproductive health, because that is a new stage of life. And it requires a lot more concentration on cardiac, cognitive, and bone health. These are all things that are going to matter to you. And it is really, really hard to be in your 20s or early 30s and think that this stuff is going to matter. But boy, do I wish I'd told myself those things then. Do I wish I'd spent more time really understanding health then? Because now it's scary, right? Now, knowing that I haven't been to the gym in a couple of years and my bone density is really low is scary. I don't want to be a dependent old woman before my time. I want to stay as strong and healthy and robust as I can. And knowing about menopause affects your menopause experience. The more you know, the less afraid you're going to be. And I don't want, somebody clapped back at me on Instagram and said, "Oh, you're using scare tactics." And I was like, I'm not using scare tactics. I don't want to scare anybody, but I want to prepare you for things that are going to change. And if you know that they're coming, then you can figure out how you want to manage that change.
Yeah. Yeah. You're giving people agency.
Exactly. And we keep whispering, right? Like the change, it's like whispering cancer, right?
Right.
This whole thing that we have to be embarrassed about this life transformation or any kind of sickness or weakness is really a waste of time. The more we can, and I'm sorry, when I say sickness or weakness, I'm not talking about menopause. I was saying, a lot of people don't admit to being sick, like when they have cancer. People don't want to admit if they are diagnosed with a potentially fatal disease because they think that people will treat them differently or that they could get fired or any number of things, right? And I realized that it is so important for us to talk about things. The more we shine a light on things, the more we innovate for the darkness, the less scary being in the dark is, right? We're not
right.
I mean, I talk about this all the time, right? The monster under the bed is because your bed is so dark, right? It's so dark under there. The minute you shine a flashlight, you realize like, oh, those are just dust bunnies and my teddy bear. Like, that's not so scary.
Yeah. I mean,
it's manageable.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're talking to the name of this show is Let It Out for that very reason, because I believe, what we hold on to hurts us, right? Like if you think about shadow and integrating your shadow, like we all have light and dark. It's it takes so much energy to manage what we're pushing down. But if we just share it and let it come to the surface, then we can move on, and that energy can be used elsewhere.
1,000%. And I really believe in what you're saying about that idea of sharing. And let it out is not just a question of having that conversation with yourself, right? I think it is very important, as I said, to be self-aware. I realize I have a negative voice that has gotten very strong. It was really during perimenopause where I really felt like I lacked a lot of confidence. I felt so insecure about so many things and so unsure about my place in the world. And the one thing that I will say about that is like, I still have to stop and realize, wow, you have just been beating the shit out of yourself for the last 5 minutes in your brain without even thinking about it. You're on autopilot and you have to stop and interrupt that voice and at least get another voice in there to put in the boxing ring. Otherwise, you don't stand a fighting chance. it is even more important than recognizing that to be able to recognize when you are having those kind of malignant negative thoughts and be able to say, hey, not just to yourself, but to someone else, I am struggling with this. It is important. It is not okay. It is important and necessary to ask for help when you are hurting in any way. You must. It's essential. We are not meant to exist alone. And that is why, help is so important. It's what makes us who we are.
Yeah, exactly. Well, God, I love talking to you so much. And I have a million more questions in my copious notes. Can I ask you a couple rapid fires before we end? Okay. I have to ask you about hosting because you're one of the most iconic hosts of all time. And you're incredibly wise and articulate, and to give advice to someone I know is so challenging, but what does being a good host mean to you?
Certainly on What Not to Wear, I felt like I was in my element. That was what I'd sort of trained my whole life to do, was talk about clothes and how they fit. And certainly even talking about Steve Jobs and connecting the dots backwards, I felt really prepared to do it because I'd really studied psychology and philosophy. And I understood sort of the human condition and what it means to feel good about who you are and how we can change our sense of self-esteem, both outside in and inside out. And I never considered that being a host. Even on the Today Show or Oprah or Access Hollywood, when I was doing fashion segments, I didn't feel like a host. I guess the first time I really felt like a host was when I was on the red carpet and interviewing celebrities and other people for the first time. And that was really still connected to what they were wearing. So it never felt like I was hosting anything. I guess the next time I kind of felt like I hosted something was being a guest host on The View. And that was very different. I think for me, I felt really out of my element because it wasn't like every quip I could make was about what somebody was wearing. I had to weigh in on other topics. And I felt very tentative about being myself, because being a host on something like The View, as Joy Behar once famously said to me, if you have any kind of fame whatsoever, 50% of the people already hate you, was terrifying to me. I was like, I don't want anybody to hate me. And that was even after, having been on a show for 15 years, I still didn't want that kind of ire directed at me. And it was one thing I think I could take it about fashion, but I was afraid of people really criticizing me for my political views or things like that so openly. And with social media, people are cruel. People are so cruel in a way that I think actually is hard for me. I'm not made of Teflon. I do find some comments that people make really, really painful. And I felt that I was very tentative on The View because of it. So I don't know that I have any advice about being a host. I love the fact that you think that I'm such an iconic one. I would never have, I wouldn't never even have called myself a host. So I guess I really have no advice in that.
Well,
category.
I guess I'll rephrase it then. And what I was gonna ask too is, I love your podcast and having important conversations. And like we were saying, talking about difficult things and approaching subjects that other people don't, and being on the other side of hundreds of podcasts and hundreds of interviews. What makes a good interview or a good conversation to you?
One that isn't afraid to go to scary places, and one that isn't afraid to be truthful, even sometimes when the truth hurts, and one that looks for the commonalities in humanity and ways to lift each other up and to speak kind of the same language and to resonate with other people. I think that's what makes for an incredible interview. And also always an aha moment, something that you might not have thought of that is expressed to you in a way that really resonates is the best part of a great interview.
Yeah. I mean, I had so many aha moments in the interviews I listened to you on prepping for this. And one of them came when you were talking about shopping and how you were talking about finance and how shopping became a way for you to not have to be in the reality that you were in when you were unhappy. Mm-hmm. And that was a real aha for me. And it made me think of makeovers in general. I've talked about this several times on this show, and it's something that I kind of call the coming back from summer vacation or coming back from camp feeling, where it's this, who am I going to be after I read this book? Or if I just get this dress, or if I just get this house or this partner or whatever, it's like, this will make me, that's what I'm living for. But it takes you out of the moment that you're in. And makeover shows and makeover tropes, I think about Clueless, or I think about all of these. I grew up in the early 2000s and tail end of the 90s. And it just seemed, including your show, which I loved, and I loved all of these, but they're really in me. And I still do it now. Like, a friend will leave town and I'm like, all right, well, when they come back, I'm going to be there and I'm going to recognize me. There's this like culture, but yeah, I would just love if you talk about that myth a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, it's the myth of the horizon, right? I mean, it is the thing of when you are, and the time period of my life that you're talking about, when I wrote that article for Refinery about, sort of mindlessly shopping, was when I couldn't walk, when I had had spine surgery and I was like lying on the couch for 3 months before I could start physical therapy. I just didn't want to be where I was. I didn't want to be who I was. And I was really fascinated by Edie Sedgwick at that stage. I was like, I'd done all this research on her and I'd read all these books and I was so fascinated by her style. And I just started buying big earrings and kind of caps and these like cool mini dresses. But did I really want to dress or be like Edie? No, I wanted to escape reality. And it is very easy to see why we have a drug addiction problem in this country. It's very easy to see why we have an alcohol addiction problem in this country. It's very easy to see why we have a lot of people who spend too much money in this country. We are escaping things that are hard. And again, it goes back to that idea that sometimes it is very hard to sit in the now if the now is uncomfortable. And that is part of what we have to learn to breathe and live through without sort of depending on crutches to make things feel like we're either happier or better or more in control than we are.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And, I think this speaks to time, but something else I always ask is your greatest lesson on social media, or what is your relationship with digital culture, and how are you handling your relationship to that now?
Yeah. I mean, I really hate social media. I'm not going to lie. I think that if I wasn't running this company, I would have closed all my social media accounts by now. I have no idea what personal branding means. I have no idea how to do it, and I don't care. I care very much about my company, and I care very much that we use education as marketing and that we are able to do that for free on social media and in a lot of ways that I think is very helpful. I think it's great for brands, and I think it's important for brands to stand up for things and the causes that they believe in. And we're able to do that very easily on social. But me personally, it is that idea that comparison is the thief of confidence and joy. And I was talking with somebody earlier, and we were talking about that study that Instagram sort of buried about teenage girls being so depressed. I don't think it's just teenage girls. I think it's everybody. Yeah. I get depressed if I'm on Instagram too long. I get depressed if I see all my friends in Italy or Greece or at a movie premiere or something where I'm not. One, that's no way to live. And it also takes you out of real life and the moment and the now and what you could be doing that is productive and helpful in a meaningful way in your real life instead of your digital life, right? But I'm not naive. I do think that a lot of this advent of technology and social media has brought about incredible things. I mean, look at the reckoning. Look at what we've been able to do in systemic change against racism and genderism and sexuality and things that really have been boiling beneath the surface. But social media connects us in a way that we can find our people, we can find our tribes. And, that way we feel more connected and we feel more seen and more accepted and more understood. That's the upside of social media, is the kind of connections that, finding somebody to talk to in Alaska when you live in Australia is amazing. That is amazing to me. That is it's mind blowing. But the hard stuff is when we start to manufacture our lives for the delight or, opinion of others. And, it's like, did it happen if you didn't post it on Instagram is a little, or TikTok or whatever the latest platform is, be real. To me, it all feels it all feels forced and it all feels like we are getting further away from who we are really. And I remember years and years ago, I gave a talk at Cosmopolitan to a bunch of college grads. They had just graduated. They were all like 22, 23 years old. And I think that everybody at Cosmo at that time was a little disappointed in me because I think they thought I was going to talk about like, what are the best leather leggings to buy and, you know, which is the best liquid eyeliner. And really, I talked about social media. And I talked about the things that I think that we are losing because of social media. And one of them is what is true authenticity. And now I think, again, I gave this talk in 2015 or 2016. So this was quite a while ago. But the idea that there are people who are not just using filters or fillers or Botox, but are taking 1,000 photographs until they find the perfect one to post. And that's the only one we see. It's not necessarily what they actually look like. It's the picture that they chose to represent themselves, right? So in some ways, we're losing authenticity by being so preoccupied with what our digital image is like. And another thing that I think that we're losing is discovery. It used to take effort to figure things out. We didn't have Google when I was growing up. We had to go to the library. We had to look things up in encyclopedias, right? And in some ways, not knowing something, I think, is really wonderful. But in other ways, I think discovery is about the journey of learning something, the process of learning something. That's all been taken away by being able to look up anything on Google or Wikipedia or IMDb or any other information platform, CNN, any news channel, right? So it's taken away from the effort of learning in a way that makes learning more meaningful. And I think finally, it's changing our relationship to intimacy. If you treat people like you can swipe right or swipe left on them, it's basically like disposable fashion, right? It's like fast fashion, but we're treating people that way. I've never been on a dating app. I don't know what it's like to have a text conversation before I see somebody's face or hear somebody's voice. And to me, that's a very different way of relating to a person. And the fact is, you don't release oxytocin in your brain from swiping right, you release it from a hug. Intimacy is changing in a way. And I realize that technology, obviously I'm not naive, technology has forever changed the way that we exist in the world. We do not have linear lives anymore. We are not living by the industrial revolution style of family unit. And we go to work and we come home and we take vacation and we cook and all of the things. Now we can order food from anywhere and we can date on apps and we can work remotely and things are going to change permanently. Soon we may all be like sleeping in our chairs and living in a metaverse. I don't know. But what I do know is that our biological brains and bodies were not made for this kind of technology this quickly. I do know that our brains see more images in one news cycle than our grandparents saw in their lifetimes. That affects the way our brains are going to grow and how younger generations are going to perceive things like authenticity, discovery, and intimacy. And maybe I'm the one who's going to grieve the loss of those things in the way in which we've known them. And younger people won't because they won't have known them the way that I have seen them change. Who knows? But it is hard for me to watch. And it is hard for me to know that some of what we're headed to in a digital world won't be very healthy for us.
It's complex and nuanced. I think about that all the time. You know, we just are over 400 episodes of this show. And but I think I was 22 when I started it. And I don't think my great grandmother like knew 400 people like in her circle, much less spoke to them, much less all the listener, you know. It makes our worlds bigger in some ways that are really great, like you spoke about, and ways that are maybe not so good. And anyway, we got to protect ourselves from it all the best we can. So thank you.
And, look, I think we need to protect ourselves and we also need to evolve, right? There's a lot of things I'm saying that about what I'm going to grieve that a 14-year-old is not going to care about when she is my age, right? I mean, they may experience something completely different. And that's the thing. Like when we hear about young kids who like go up to the TV and swipe it, it's because that's all they know. So you can't really grieve something that you didn't experience. And I think that's another interesting thing about my generation. And maybe every generation goes through this to some extent, but I think Gen X really stands on the precipice of like true evolution in terms of growing up born with rotary phones to the fact that we have mini computers in our back pockets today is a pretty significant tectonic shift in terms of civilization. And to be part of this generation is fascinating because of it.
I had a good conversation with my really close friend here is also Gen X. And we were talking with another person in his generation. To me, I look at them and I'm like, you guys have the best music. You didn't have I think you have like the best culture. I think the 90s culture I just really enjoy. But to your point, I had Facebook in high school, but I also had a flip phone and now I have a computer in my back pocket. I had a little bit more of like a dock to get to the lake, but it's still, a transition. Yeah. Where it's like, I still remember not having the internet, and the internet that I had is very different than the internet that people growing up now have. So
again, I am very much a believer in for every pro, there's a con, and for every con, there's a pro. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Like there are always two sides to a coin. So what does that look like? What does that mean? What that means is we try and amplify the pros of technology and really try to manage the cons. And again, this is part of everything that we do in life, right? It is really interesting to be 53, to have been born in 1969 and for it to be 2022 feels like a really weird stretch of time to have been alive. And I remember I could not have been more than 4 or 5 years old. And I was sitting in Washington Square Park in Greenwich Village. And I was sitting with my grandfather, and I would spend most of my weekends with my grandparents. And I was with my grandfather, and we were sitting right by the fountain in the middle of the park. And I said to him, what do you think it's going to be like in the year 2000? Right. And this was in 1974, maybe 73, maybe. And he said, oh, Stacy. And meanwhile, while I'm sitting there, I'm looking around and I'm thinking in my head, we're going to have flying taxis and we're going to, like all these crazy things. And he was like, I think some things will be really different, Stacy, and some things will really be the same. And the funny thing is I don't think he would recognize the world today. I don't think he could fathom that we have FaceTime. That was what you saw on Star Trek. You know what I mean? Totally. So there are some things that are just so remarkable in the fact that they've been created. They are so astounding that even though they have a downside, there's still so much to celebrate in terms of like what evolution looks like, whether it's technology or style or work on ourselves, right? The acknowledgement of evolution, I think, is what's so fascinating and what makes life worth living.
Yeah. And who knows? I hope we do this again sometime, and we'll probably be talking about like the wildness of, even just thinking how I said at the beginning, listening to conversations from 2 years ago feels really dated now because of how quickly part of that is just the wildness of the last couple of years, but even a pre-2016 conversation feels like, wow, you have no idea what's coming. There are some things that you can't help but like place things in time. And I know every decade has that, but yeah, it just feels like it's moving quite quickly.
Oh, it feels like it's moving faster and faster. And that's another thing, you perceive time differently as you age. Things feel faster. I remember as a little kid, summers lasted forever. And now this summer, just like literally I blinked and it was over.
Yeah. I moved quite accidentally from New York to here to LA, and not having seasons is very disorienting. I didn't notice it the first year, but now that I've been here going on 2 since the pandemic, I really feel like I am in my 20s still. Like, I feel like I haven't moved from when I got here. It's wild.
Well, I always felt like I couldn't live in LA because the weather is so nice that I would never get anything done.
It's true. Yeah, I think it is tough. Well, speaking of, I truly want to talk to you forever. And as you know, I have more notes. So I hope you do come back, but really you're such a delight, and I admire you so much. And I'm so grateful that you took all this time time. And as I said, the name of this show is Let It Out. So is there anything that you wish that I would have asked you about? Anything you're excited about? Anything that you want to share about right now?
I'm excited about so many things, but I think the thing that I'm probably most excited about is that on October 18th, which is World Menopause Day, State of Menopause is joining 15 other menopause companies to sit at a summit and discuss all of the issues that surround kind of the biases and the prejudice and the ignorance and the disinformation and miseducation around menopause and how we move that needle. I reached out to all of these CEOs. Most of them are Gen Xers. And I realized something that, we have all grown up being taught to compete. That was what we were taught. Never let anybody see you sweat, right? Look like a duck, like be unruffled on top and paddle like hell underneath. Never let anybody know that something is wrong. Never show any weakness. And here I thought, oh my God, what if we could show the community that needs us most that we put collaboration above competition, that we are going to put that consumer above each of our individual needs as a company and come together to create something bigger and better for them. And I could not be more proud that we are pulling that off.
I love that. Well, congrats on everything that you've been working on and that you've done so far and that you will do. And who knows what you'll do next. I'm just excited to see it and get to be your friend and follow along like I have since I can remember. So Thank you so much. And truly so grateful that you did this show.
Oh my God. Thank you so much for having me. This was so lovely. And I know that I would love to come back because I feel like we didn't even scratch the surface. It's been 2 hours.
I know. We really didn't. It was incredible. But we always end letting out a sigh, letting out a deep breath together. So do you have time?
Yeah.
Okay. Inhale. Let it out. We did it.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
I just pulled up your article on anorexia nostalgia on Refinery to read it because I'm just so interested in your writing because it looks beautiful.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, that was years ago now. And I hope to write something again soon, in the same vein or a big update to that because there's been so many twists and turns, but gosh, that means so much to me. Thank you.
It is really my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Okay, that was my conversation with icon Stacy London. I hope you liked it. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end. Truly, it means so much to me. And, I put that ad in there about In Process, but if you want to be part of it, you can join at any time. I would love to have you. If you have any questions, let me know. We meet twice a month and we do open studio office hours time where we do 2 Pomodoro techniques together. It's a productivity technique and we rest together and we get done the tasks that we have all been procrastinating and we move each other forward with that. And we go through, my outlook on the creative process, which is first creating space and then gathering, taking in inspiration and experiences, and then trying, like throwing things at the wall, seeing what sticks, and then eventually sharing in some way. And then we do it again, and it's cyclical and seasonal. And like I always say, if you like this podcast, you'll probably like it. If you hate this podcast, hard no for you. Again, I am just really grateful that you're here and that I got to talk to Stacy London. Let me know if you listened to the end. Let me know your thoughts on this. If you learned something, you know where to find me. I'm around. You can email me. I am at Katie Dalebout on Instagram, and Let It Out. Let It Out with 3 T's on Instagram. Also me. And if you're not already getting the Let It Out letter, it's just my newsletter. Feel free to sign up. Last week was a conversation with Courtney Marie Andrews after a long break, but I loved that. She's a musician and a poet. If you didn't listen and want to go back, feel free. We took a long break, not by choice. We just didn't have any sponsors, to be honest with you. But we are back, and next week there's an episode with author of the brand new brilliant book, Bad Thoughts, Nada Alec. I will talk to you then. But in the meantime, if you want more of my voice somehow, I don't know why you would, but if you do, my second podcast, my show with Serena Wolf, Spiraling, is back. We're releasing new episodes, and this is season 4. So that is, wherever you listen to this podcast. All right. Love you and talk to you there or elsewhere or next week. Have a great week. And thank you again so much for being here.